right. Good morning, students from the Jamaica School of Preaching and Biblical Studies. And good morning to all of you who are joining us at JSP Mona on YouTube. You are our welcome guest, and I hope that any of you who have doubts about the existence, that these doubts will be cleared up during the course of this broadcast. Now we're going to be looking at Introduction to Biblical Apologetics, and I'm going to be looking first of all at lesson number 18, entitled The Existence of the Universe. And after that you have a dash or hyphen, argument for the existence of God. This is more popularly in scientific circles called the cosmological argument. Cosmological is from the Greek word cosmos, and technically in Greek grammar, cosmos refers to the world. But in scientific circles, they use cosmos to refer to the universe and not just to the world. Cosmological argument for the existence of God is to use the existence of the universe as evidence that there must be a creator, that the universe could not have come into existence by itself, that there must have been an adequate cause for it to come into existence. That is essentially what this argument is. Yes.
So the cosmos, right?
Yes.
It has a Hebrew word.
Yeah, I'm sure it has the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, translated as the heavens, some translations, the heaven, is ha shamayim. Ha is the definite article, and shamayim is the plural of heaven, or it's heavens.
Okay.
And that is the biblical word for the universe. When you hear about heavens, it is referring to the universe with its different galaxies, the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the different planets out there. As you can see in the picture I put there, you have the Earth, the moon, you have another galaxy out there, another one here, another one there. We're going to begin now by going to God in prayer. Father in heaven, I pray that you'll be with us as we begin this lesson, and we pray that you may help us to understand it, and understand it so well that we can use it in defending the fact that you do exist. In Jesus' name, amen. So this is lesson number 18, the existence of the universe, dash, argument for the existence of God. Here are the general objectives. Number 1, to examine evidence that the universe has not always existed. Number 2, to examine evidence that anything which has not always existed needed a cause for it to come into existence. Number 3, to examine evidence that if originally there was absolutely nothing, and notice, viewers and students here, I have put the word nothing in capital letters. If originally there was absolutely nothing, then nothing would have come into existence. To examine evidence that the universe is designed to its smallest detail. And number 5, to examine the conclusion that God created the universe. These are the specific objectives for this lesson. Number 1, at the end of this lesson, the students will have analyzed 3 evidences that the universe has not always existed. Number two, at the end of this lesson, the students will have discussed the argument that since the universe has not always existed, but it now exists, that it had a beginning. Number three, at the end of this lesson, the students will have compared two views about the beginning of the universe. One, it began from absolutely nothing. Or two, it began from an adequate cause. Number four, at the end of this lesson, the students will have given three examples of the universe's design to its smallest detail. And number four, at the end of this lesson, the students will discuss the conclusion that the adequate cause for the universe and its design to its smallest detail is someone who is supremely intelligent and powerful, and that is God, the Creator. And so that is where I'm going with this lesson. And so the first question to ask is, has the universe always existed? Dr. Robert Jastrow, who was born in 1925 and who died in 2000, who was director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. Let me just explain more. NASA stands for National Aeronautics Space Administration. It is the organization that sent different rockets into orbit around the Earth, and then later in orbit around the Moon, and in 1969 was successful in landing 3 men on the Moon. I was around back then, but I was a child, and I remember early Sunday morning in 1969, I think it might have been July, that 3 men stepped off of that spaceship onto the surface of the Moon. So we find that they are responsible for the space program for the United States. Well, Dr. Robert Jastrow used to be in charge of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies and was the author of many important studies in astronomy. And he concluded that the universe had a beginning. He argued that the evidence from astronomy demonstrates that the universe had a beginning at a certain moment in time. Quote, these are some parts of what he has written. The astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential elements in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis are the same. The chain of events leading to man commenced suddenly and sharply at a definite moment in time, in a flash of light and energy. I got this from the book entitled Christianity for Skeptics, written by Dr. Steve Kumar, along with Dr. Jonathan Sarfati. And this is taken from chapter 1 of the book entitled, Does God Exist? Pages 20 to 21. Now moving on to the next question. Has the universe, if the universe has not always existed, but it now exists, how did it come into existence. If the universe has not always existed, but it now exists, how did it come into existence? I want you to know that originally, astronomers believed that the universe always existed. They knew that if they did not take that position, they would be hard-pressed to come up with an adequate explanation for how the universe got here. So they preferred to hold on to the view that the universe always existed. You see, whether it is the universe or God, you must have something or someone always in existence. Because if you end up with the view that at one time nothing existed, it sounds idiotic or foolish to say that something as magnificent as the universe came from absolutely nothing. Common sense knows that that is foolish. And so for many, many years, astronomers were holding tightly to the view that the universe was not created, but that it has always been around. And that was trying to get away from the view that there is a creator. They were forced to accept the view that the universe has not always existed by different astronomers who saw evidence in the universe that it could not always have been out there. So now we come to the point where people accept that the universe has not always existed. And this is where this argument on the screen comes in. If the universe has not always existed, but it now exists, how did it come into existence? You know, I'm going to have to back up because there was an important part of the presentation that I didn't even realize I had skipped. So sorry about that. Let's go back up here. This is very important, and I didn't even realize I'd skipped it. So the question is, has the universe always existed? The laws of thermodynamics, and I will soon explain what those laws mean, prove that the universe has not always existed. These are the most fundamental laws of the physical sciences. The first law of thermodynamics is that the total amount of mass to energy is constant. In other words, there is no extra energy coming into the universe. Whatever amount of energy was there in the beginning, it remains there at this time. There is no additional energy coming in to the universe. The total amount of mass or matter and energy is constant. This means that the physical substances that make up the universe and the energy that is in the physical substances is finite or limited. You're not getting any extra mass or any extra energy. It is limited. There's just so much that is out there and no more. The second law of thermodynamics is that the amount of energy in the universe available for work is running down. That is, there is a continual decrease in usable energy that will eventually lead to no energy being available to be used. If the total amount of mass energy is limited and the amount of usable energy is decreasing, cannot have existed forever. Otherwise, it would already have exhausted all usable energy and reached what is known as heat death. That is, all radioactive atoms would have decayed and no further work would be possible. Atoms was once thought to be the tiniest matter available that makes up everything around us. But with more powerful microscopes, matter smaller than the atom has been found in the atom. They are called protons and neutrons. But these atoms is what makes up molecules like water or dirt or any material substance. So if all of these atoms stop having any energy in them, it means that there can be no further work that they do. They can't do anything else. If the universe has been around from everlasting, it would have run out of energy and stopped working a long time ago. So, the best solution is that the universe must have had a beginning with a lot of usable energy that is now running, and it is now running down. I got this information from the Creation Answers book, chapter 1, entitled, Does God Exist? Page 18. Let me go back with Dr. Robert Jastrow. This is where Jastrow comes in. Jastrow discovered that the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential elements in the astronomical and biblical accounts are the same. Leading to man commenced suddenly and sharply, definite and energy. In other words, Robert Jastrow was saying that when the Bible says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, that there was indeed a beginning of the universe. And he says the essential elements in what he has observed in astronomy and what is written in Genesis and the Bible are the same. The universe began at a definite moment in time, the beginning. So we find that this really frightened a lot of astronomers to realize that the universe had a beginning. And now they were hard-pressed to give an explanation for how all of this organized system of matter in motion and energy was created. If they thought that at one time there was nothing around, which is what they had to say now, since the universe did not always exist, how can we explain how this universe got here? So this leads me to this slide now. This is where I was on a few minutes ago. If the universe has not always existed, but it now exists, how did it come into existence? Now follow along. Here's the reasoning now. Anything which has not always existed, but exists now, had a beginning. The universe has not always existed, and therefore it had a beginning. Everything which had a beginning must have had what? That's true. But before we come to the Creator himself, you see, you have to argue and reason things out with the atheists. Must have had a cause. Someone or something must have caused the universe that wasn't here all along to start to be here. So everything which had a beginning must have had a cause. Let me just illustrate briefly what I mean by cause. If you don't eat any food for a whole day and you go to bed, what is likely to happen is that your stomach is going to be filled with dust. Okay? So what caused your stomach to be filled with dust? You did not eat. What did you say? Didn't eat. Now, if you have a motor vehicle and you find that when you turn on the ignition, you see on the dashboard in front of you near the steering wheel of the vehicle that your engine is heating up rapidly, and you look in the engine and you find that you hardly have any coolant, that green fluid. Some people just use plain water to cool the engine. That is the cause. You don't have enough coolant. And there may be a deeper cause. Maybe the tubes that bring the coolant into the engine has some leaking. Maybe there are some holes that the coolant is going out of the system, and therefore you keep running out of coolant. There is always a cause for whatever happens around you, in your life and around you. And when you look at the vast universe, which shows such intelligent design, and it is so precise in timing that scientists can predict when a Halley's Comet will be coming around, then we know that there must have been an adequate cause for the universe to have come into existence. So everything which had a beginning must have had a cause. There must be a reason why everything around us has begun. Now, atheists believe that the universe began from absolutely nothing. Atheists believe that the universe began from absolutely nothing. This means that although there was originally no matter, that is, no physical or tangible substances, and no energy, yet matter and energy began from nothing. But is not cause for the universe to begin to exist? Which one of you know of anything in your experiences in life so far in which something has come from nothing? If there were nothing, then there would be nothing as a result. If there is nothing to cause anything to come into being, then how can you have something coming into being? If there were no one present from all eternity who had the intelligence and the energy to cause everything to come into being, nothing would have come. So for the atheist who do not believe in a supreme being, that is God, who has created the universe, and who believe that at one time there was absolutely nothing, they do not have an intelligent explanation for the universe coming into being. Yes?
What about God?
What about God? Of course. God is the most intelligent explanation for the cause of the universe. The problem with the atheists is they don't want to believe in God. Many of them are not really honest about believing there is no God. But deep down in their heart, they are afraid of believing there is a God. For what really is alarming them is that they want to do what pleases themselves. And what is in the Bible many times is not what pleases themselves. So they prefer to argue God out of existence so that they can enjoy what they want without feeling guilty about doing it. So they will try their best not to admit even the possibility that there is a supreme being with greater intelligence than anyone or anything, and greater power and energy than anyone and anything, who was that adequate cause which brought the universe into existence. So they try to argue, yes, we know, at one time there was nothing at all, no God, no matter, no energy. But it is a miracle that even though there was nothing, there is now something. So they have to say it was a miraculous thing. They don't know exactly how it happened, but they know that since the universe is here, it happened. And it was a miracle. Not a miracle caused by any supreme being, but you don't even have anything such as a natural miracle. So they have to resort to saying it was a miracle, not from any God, but that since we have the universe and we can't really explain to anyone's satisfaction how it happened to be here, we must say then a miracle happened that don't happen anymore, and that is why we are lucky to have a universe that is here. So we are going to begin a search. Does the universe give any clues to how it began? So let us begin some detective work. In atoms, and I learned this recently, I learned this in August of last year. I was so surprised when I heard it. In atoms, remember atoms was once thought to be the smallest material substance. The word is a Greek word that means indivisible. That means it can't be divided into a smaller section. Well, now they have found that the atoms have protons and electrons inside of the atom. And what happens in the universe of planets revolving around a sun or a star happens inside the atom. There is a revolving of different elements in the atom around the center of the atom. Now the electrons to protons inside the atom is said to be 1 to 1,836. Okay. Now notice how precise the number is. 1 to 1,836. If this were larger, if the ratio were larger or smaller, atoms would not be able to come together to form molecules, such as water. So the universe is made up of atoms. Everything is made up of atoms. And if the ratio of the different elements in the atom were any larger than what it is, or any smaller than what it is, then the atoms would not be able to come together to form molecules. And molecules, for example, like water, which is so essential for life. Now, how could this have been an accident? That a precise ratio is so exact that if it were larger, no matter could form. If it were smaller, no matter could form. Nothing would be able to form. And so we find that it shows that there is intelligent design, intelligent planning, intelligent design, and it could not have happened by chance or even naturally. It shows some intelligent mathematical planning for this to happen. Yes?
Yeah, why that number have 2 dots?
Or the 2 dots, like our colon, is what is used in mathematics in the topic called ratio. Ratio is showing the relationship between one thing to another. Let me give you a down-to-earth everyday example. All right. How many teachers do you have at the Jamaica School of Preaching? You may not actually be taught by every teacher, but how many teachers are here?
About 7.
About 7. And how many students are here total, right here? Not really counting the extension classes
4.
or...
No. 8. Yeah.
All right.
And that one?
Right here in this building.
Yeah. Oh. No matter about everyone.
All right. You have about 8. Okay. So if you have 7 teachers and you have 8 students, then the ratio or the relation of the number of teachers to the number of students is 7 teachers, and you put 1 dot over the other, which represents the word 2. 7 teachers to 8 students. Or let me give you one more example. Yeah, let me just give you one more. Now let us say that you have 14 female students, which I know you don't have. 14 female students in a separate dorm, and 7 male students. So the ratio of young men to young women would be 7 young men who are students here to 14 female students. Okay. Another way of putting that would be that there is about 1 male student to every 2 female students. 1 to 2. If you want to make it very simple. 1 to 2. So in this ratio here in the atoms, in the ratio of electrons to protons, which are 2 elements that are inside the atom itself, you would have 1 to 1,836. Notice how precise it is. And those who study physics say, if this ratio were any larger, or if it were any smaller, atoms would not be able to come together to form molecules. Molecules such as water. Okay, water consists of
1 atom of hydrogen.
1 atom of
Hydrogen.
H2O.
Oxygen and 2 atoms of hydrogen.
Alright.
H2O.
Alright, so the 2 would be relating to what?
To hydrogen.
Right, so 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. But if the ratio in the atom itself was any smaller than 1 to 1,836, then the hydrogen atoms and the oxygen atom would not be able to come together to form water. Nothing could form.
And that's also there must be ethics between them, because when you look at the hydrogen should be one atom of hydrogen, by the fact that hydrogen should be joined together with oxygen, there must be a change between them. What I mean is that when you look at the valence of oxygen is 2, hydrogen is 1. If you need to have water, so hydrogen need to take the valence of oxygen, which is oxygen take the 1 of hydrogen to give you the water. So that means water cannot be made by chance. It is something special, the planification.
Okay, thank you.
Put them together.
Yes. Okay. And without water, there can be no life.
No life.
All right. Let us look at another clue. Number 2 on the screen. Our sun is the right color. If it were redder or bluer, photosynthetic response in vegetation would be weaker. Let me explain photosynthetic. Light. And synthetic has to do with putting the energy from light together with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the water from the ground that is drawn up by the roots. The chlorophyll, the green pigment that is in leaves of trees and plants, looks that way because it is it has many micro or small solar panels spread out over the leaf. And so it extracts or takes from the sunlight energy and combines it with carbon dioxide that it breathes in and with the water that is drawn up from the roots under the ground. And it produces its own food. Well, if the sun were not the color that it is right now, if it were redder, if it were bluer, then this kind of photosynthetic action taking place during the daylight hours of plants and trees and in the grass would be weaker than what it is, and the plants and the trees and the grass would not have enough food to keep it alive. So there would be no living vegetation. Another clue, number 3, our sun is also not only the right color, but it is the right size. If the sun were larger than what it is, its brightness would change too quickly, so that when it becomes dim, the earth would freeze, and when it would become bright, earth would burn up. If it were smaller than what it is now, the earth would not be able to support life. Now there are other balls of gases, hot gases out in the universe, and because of the distance that they are from the earth, they look tiny, and they're called stars. Now they are usually bigger than the sun. The sun could really fit into them. They are much bigger than the sun. But when they are that big, they are not stable, as I just read. Because of their size, all of a sudden they get dim. And then another time they get bright. Our sun tends to stay at the same brightness throughout. And it varies a bit, but it does not vary or change to the extreme as how these stars change. So our sun is the right size. Another clue, the Earth's distance from the sun is crucial for a stable sun. If the Earth were too far away from the sun, most water would freeze. If the earth were too close, most water would boil. Now, this doesn't sound like something that accidentally happened. For it to be so detailed like this, so precise, it sounds like someone with a great mathematical mind, someone with a great physics mind, someone with a great chemistry mind, who was the originator of all the laws of science that scientists are just discovering now, that put these things together in the right proportion. And so, when you look at the universe, it does give clues as to how it began. It couldn't have begun from nothing. Nothing produces nothing. And it shows such a high degree of organization and planning and mathematical preciseness that it must have been created by a great supreme being called God. So let us look at the conclusion. Yes.
Like there are some countries like Canada and some part of the USA.
Mm.
There's really freeze up, like they don't have snow. It's because sun from that country or
Well, the sun is the same distance, but what happens, because of the shape of the earth, you find that because of the
rotation, sir?
You also have rotation and the earth's tilt over like this. That when the sun is, let us say, when the sun is more further south in relation to the earth, a lot more sunlight is spread over in the northern part. It's not concentrated. When the sunlight is focused on this, near to the center, where you have the equator,
Is depending on the season also.
yeah, the season also, you have greater heat. But when it is spread out as you get further north, the intensity of the concentration of the sunlight is not enough to produce the same amount of heat for countries further nearer to the equator. Okay? And it also depends on the season. Because different seasons mean that the earth is
A special
position in relation to the sun as it is moving around the sun 365 and 40 days.
Like the country, Ecuador, it is always hard in the Ecuador by the fact that you receive the sunlight directly.
This country is called
Ecuador.
Ecuador?
Yes.
Okay.
It's always hard by the fact that its position is directly on the equator.
Okay.
Then when the sunlight, it always receives the sunlight full.
Yes.
So like Canada is different. It's the season. So when the earth turn to itself, so it depends on its position. Then this is the like for example, this is the sun.
Yeah.
And then the earth.
Yeah.
Turn around the sun like this.
Yes.
And then at the same time, the earth turns to itself.
Yes.
Come, Michel, come. You can come. This is Isha. Isha is the sun.
Yes.
I'm the earth.
Yes.
I turn to Isha and then I turn to myself like that.
Yeah.
Like that. Turn to Isha. So it depends on my position. So if sometime this is the sun called Isha, yes, this is me, this is Kennedy, Kennedy.
Yeah.
And then to receive the sunlight.
Yeah.
It's the same thing like day and night.
Yes. Yes.
It is something like day and night.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And then day, you see the light, and the night, you see the darkness.
Yes.
Because they sun.
You see, that is another clue that I didn't even put here. That if the earth was not rotating, if one part of the earth was always facing the sun, that part of the earth would burn up. Yes. And the other part that is always away from the sun would freeze. But you see that the earth is turning so that every part of the earth at some point may receive the heat.
And also in a special time.
Yes.
So the earth should be turned
yes.
to the sun for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And also tune to itself for
yes.
24 hours.
Yes.
And every day.
Yes.
So that means there's something special. There's someone with great power to do that.
And this has been going on for thousands of years.
Yes.
And if it were just accidental that it happened, why is it for the past thousands and thousands of years, the earth has been rotating and it has been revolving. Rotating on its own and revolving around the sun at the same time. So these are clues. There are many more clues. I've only selected some. And these clues, I took it from, as you can see on the board, from the previous slide, I took it from the book entitled Christianity for Skeptics, Chapter 1, Does God Exist? Page 24. So, what is the conclusion? The universe shows intelligent planning design to the smallest detail. The adequate cause for the universe to exist is not nothing, but it is someone with greater intelligence and power than anyone or anything else in the universe, and that is God, the Creator. And this scripture sums up everything we have looked at. Ever since God created the world, his invisible qualities, that means his characteristics. We can't see him, but we can see the characteristics that he has. Both his eternal power and his divine nature have been clearly seen. Though he's invisible, we don't see him with our eyes, we can see that he has unlimited power and that he has a particular way of thinking and living. He's kind. He's considerate. They are perceived in the things that God has made, so those people have no excuse at all. So nobody has a valid excuse for not believing that there is a God. The creation bears witness to the existence of God and what kind of God he is. He has eternal power, he's kind, he's orderly, he's considerate, and he does everything perfectly. Yes?
The question I always ask myself, why people don't believe in God? Because the nature shows that he has a creator. Because when you look at the universe, we see that he being by himself, that means someone created. Like if you sick, you need a doctor.
Yes.
But if the person that you call doctor, if don't study, he cannot give you any help.
Yes.
That's mean when you look at the universe, that shows that it's truly a creator.
That's true. Very knowledgeable. Very knowledgeable, wise, powerful, and kind.
Yes.
Okay. Now we're going to be looking, I'll soon give you 10 minutes break, but let us, in conclusion of this particular lesson, I have another lesson waiting for the next session today. We're going to be going to Creation Training Initiative, and Mike Riddle, who is the founder of it. Thank you. Mike Riddle, who is the founder of this program of training teachers to go into high schools and prep schools and to try to convince them that there is a creator and that evolution is not scientifically supported. He is going to explain the, can put it up here. He is going to explain the existence of the universe argument for God, but he's going to use the technical term that the scientists use, the cosmological evidence for the existence of God. And so how do I raise this part up? Just click on it?
Which one?
This one here. Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah, this man is one of my teachers, so he's going to explain the cosmological argument.
At the end of our lives, we're all going to face death. At that time, we will either face God or we will face nothingness. The fact that we're all going to die is not some subjective personal preference, but rather an objective truth. Therefore, it should concern us ahead of time to know which one is true. Either we will face God or we will face nothingness. I want to welcome you to Creation Radio and TV. I'm your host, Mike Little. We're about to embark on a 5-part series that talks about the evidence for the existence of God. Now, as we get started, I'd like to begin with 2 of the main evidences people use against coming to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. The first one is the argument about morality, absolutes. And the argument goes like this. If you call God good and all-powerful, then why does he allow for evil and suffering to exist? That is one of the main arguments people use for accepting Jesus Christ. And the second argument is, show me any evidence that God really does exist. For example, who made God? Where did God come from? You Christians are always invoking some magical entity to explain all your evidence. Or, I can't believe in something I can't see. These are 2 of the main reasons people deny the existence of God or deny coming to a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Absolute morality and does God exist? Well, I'd like to give us 3 cautions. As Christians, we have 3 cautions here. We do not need to prove that God exists. That is a fact. That is part of our biblical worldview as Christians, the fact of God. Secondly, as Christians, we should not require evidence for a belief in a creator God. His word should be our authority in all matters. And third, it is not that we should not use evidence. Sometimes evidence can be very useful in helping non-believers understand. The point is, we should not use evidence in such a manner that it puts God on trial. However, in all cases, we should always be ready with an answer or defense. That comes right out of 1 Peter 3:15, where it commands us as Christians to have a ready defense for the hope that's within us. We also see this in 2 Corinthians 10:4 and 5, where we're told to bring down all strongholds and everything that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. So we need to tell non-believers about the existence of God. Now, in this 5-part series, we will examine 5 different evidences for the existence of God. And these will be, number 1, the cosmological evidence. Number 2, evidence from design. Number 3, evidence from the existence of morality or absolutes, meaning what's the difference between right and wrong. Number 4, evidence from the existence of non-material entities. And number 5, the reality of God's word. Now, as we get started, a good question to ask a non-believer might go like this. Is it impossible for the God of the Bible to exist? Well, they have 2 responses, yes and no. If they answer yes to that, then we can ask them, how do you know that is impossible? Do you know everything? But if they answer no, then there is a possibility in their worldview that God could exist. Now, in this first session, dealing with the evidence for the existence of God, we're going to cover cosmology, or the cosmological argument for the existence of God. Now, as Christians, we will start with our worldview. We will begin with this premise. God is a self-existing eternal being. He has no beginning and no end. We maintain this assertion because it agrees with all reality. It is both a logical and a scientific explanation. It agrees with the fact that the universe does exist. It agrees that we have mass and energy. It agrees with our laws of science, our laws of logic, and morality and all truth. So our biblical worldview starts this way. God does exist, and his word is true. That is the basic premise or presupposition all Christians should have. Without this as our starting point, we really have no argument against the non-believer. Because this argument that God does exist and his word is true is the foundation for all that we believe. It is the very foundation for the truth of his word, the Bible. So let's begin with the cosmological argument. And it starts this way. How did the universe begin? What a question that is. How did the universe begin? Now, we're not talking about the Big Bang, because a lot of non-believers will start with the Big Bang. But we can't start there. Because what we're talking about is, where did the matter come from to create the Big Bang? Because you cannot have a Big Bang if there's not something there to go bang to start it all with. Now, there are only 3 possibilities to answer this question. Where did the matter universe? Possibility number 1, the universe created itself. That would indicate the universe had a beginning. The universe has always existed. That would indicate there was no beginning. And the third possibility is there had to be a creator, which means there was a beginning. So those are the only 3 options we have. And we'll start with option 1 here. The universe created itself. Now, in this scenario, our starting point is nothing. No space, no time, matter, energy. Now, we will ask this question. What was the cause that brought it into existence? In order for something to create itself, it would have to have the power and energy to call itself into existence. But since nothing exists, there can be no source of energy for a first cause. In addition, since nothing exists, there is no space to call ourselves into existence. See, that's just good logic and science. To create yourself, you have to have the power to create yourself. But if you don't exist, you have no power and energy. And for this universe to create itself, if there's nothing there, there's no space either. So where do you pop yourself into existence? Also, there is the first law of thermodynamics we must consider, which states this. It is called the law of conservation of energy. And it states that the total amount of energy of an isolated system is constant. Energy can be transformed from one form to another, but cannot be created or destroyed. So when we look at all of this, no space to call yourself into existence, no energy to cause you to come into existence, and then the first law of thermodynamics, both science and logic seem to refute this option that the universe created itself. Now, John Montgomery, a PhD in theology and also a doctorate of law, makes this statement. Nothing in this world is able to explain its own existence. Thus, there must be a God in order to explain the world in which we find ourselves. Now, Steve Coomer, in his book, Christianity for Skeptics, makes this statement. If God is the cause of the universe, then he must be beyond and greater than the physical dimension. Therefore, we may discover the effects or evidence of God in the universe, but not necessarily observe the essence of God within the universe, for the profound reason that he transcends space, time, and matter. Now let's turn to option number 2. The universe has three things we need to consider about that statement. Number one, if the universe has always existed, meaning no beginning, then it would be an infinite number of years old. Secondly, we need to consider now the second law of thermodynamics. And third, we need to consider the law of cause and effect. Now let's go to part 1 here. What does it mean to be an infinite number of years old? Well, that means time without end. Latin for boundless. In mathematics, it means this: existing beyond or being greater than any arbitrary number, older than 1 trillion years. So that's what it means to be an infinite number of years old. Now, 2, we need to consider the second law of thermodynamics. Now, to help us understand the second law of thermodynamics, I'd like to start with a definition and then give an illustration. The basic definition of the second law of thermodynamics goes like this: energy goes from a state of usable energy to a state of less usable energy for doing work in an isolated system. In other words, we're losing our available energy for doing work. Now, there are a couple of correlations to this, and the correlations are: order goes to a state of disorder. Not always, that's why it's only a correlation. And also, we're going from a state of complexity to a state of less complexity. But the definition deals with something called heat energy. That's what heat energy. So the second law of thermodynamics. Let's go to an illustration. If someone was to give you a brand new car, and they said everything for the lifetime of this car is paid for. If anything goes wrong, it's fixed for free. Now that's a pretty good idea, and we would like that kind of deal there. What we must do, and that is, all we ever get is 1 tank of gas, no refills. Well, that presents a problem. What happens after we've driven that car about 300 miles? We've used up all the gasoline, all the energy used to propel that car. This is an illustration of the second law. That energy, the gasoline, has all been used up and can no longer be used to propel that car. Our second illustration is stars. What do stars do? Well, they burn their lighter elements into heavier elements. For example, they burn their hydrogen into helium, into carbon, into oxygen, maybe eventually into iron. And once they burned up all their energy, they begin to gravitation and collapse inward and will explode in what we call a great big supernova. And that's another illustration of the second law. They burned up all their energy and can no longer give us light the way they do. So the second law basically states that the quantity of available energy for doing work is decreasing, not increasing. It is decreasing, getting less and less. Therefore, if we go backwards in time, there was more available energy in this universe. This means over time, the stars are losing their energy, not getting new energy. Therefore, after maybe 1 trillion, all the stars in this universe would have burned up all their energy, and there should be no stars left. That's a good illustration of what would happen if this universe had no beginning. It was infinite. All the stars would be gone. So what do the non-believers do about this? Well, they give us a challenge. The challenge is new stars are forming all the time. Well, is this actually true? Well, I do read that in the textbooks, but the question is, has anybody ever observed this? And does that statement, new stars are forming all the time, really agree with science? Well, what we have found out, and what we know based on observable and repeatable evidence, folks, is that stars really will not form by naturalistic processes. Well, how is it done according to the evolutionists? Well, we get these gas and dust clouds that rotate around and around in outer space. They just go rotating around. As they rotate around and around, they begin to gravitationally collapse inward through the rotation and get so dense they form a new star. But folks, that does not agree with science. It might agree with evolution, possibilities or evolution philosophy, but it does not agree with real science. Let me read you some quotes from scientists. Dr. Jason Lau, who has his PhD in astrophysics, makes this statement. Star formation is problematic at best. Gas is very resistant to being compressed. However, in a typical nebula, the gas pressure far exceeds the minuscule force of gravity. In other words, what he's saying here is what we actually observe and we can test. As that cloud rotates around and around, it will begin to collapse inward due to gravity. But as it does so, it generates heat pressure, which is stronger than the gravity and always causes that cloud to expand outward. That, folks, is real science. Now, let me read you some more quotes from other scientists. Dr. Walter Brown has his PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT, makes this statement. Astronomers recognize that the densest gas clouds seen in the universe today could not form stars by any known means, including gravitational collapse, unless that gas was thousands of times more compact. According to the Big Bang theory, stars began to form by gravitational collapse of dust and gas clouds 500 million years after the Big Bang's sudden inflation. Martin Harwick, astronomer, author, and former director of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., points out that if this were true, the vast energy, angular momentum, and magnetic fields generated by each collapse would be clearly visible, but they are not. Well, let's turn to Scientific American, not a Christian journal, and we read this. Once a protostar reaches a threshold of about 20 solar masses, the pressure exerted by its radiation should overpower gravity and prevent it from growing any bigger. In addition to the radiation pressure, the winds that so massive a star generates disperse its natal cloud, further limiting its growth as well as interfering with the formation of nearby stars. And let's continue. John Hartman, PhD in physics, makes this statement. Without something else, the outward pressure due to kinetic energy of the gas molecules in the cloud is so much greater than the inward pressure due to the mutual gravitational attraction of the cloud that the resulting net outward pressure would cause the gas cloud to disperse rather than collapse. And finally, from Science Journal, we read this. We don't understand how a single star forms, yet we want to understand how 10 billion stars form. Folks, the only thing we can conclude here is the universe cannot be infinite number of years old. It had to have a beginning, or it would simply be out of energy. Now, we've looked at the idea of infinity. We've looked at the second law of thermodynamics. Now let's look at the law of cause and effect. Now, the law of cause and effect teaches this. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. Now, notice that. Everything that has a beginning must have a cause. Also, it teaches every material effect must have an adequate cause that existed before the effect. Also, every single effect first had a cause that can be traced to a previous effect from another cause and eventually back to a first cause. In other words, the universe therefore requires a cause more powerful than itself. Well, we do have some scientists out there that try and deny cause and effect, even though it is a well-established law of science. Some physicists assert that quantum mechanics violates this law of cause and effect, and the principle can produce something from nothing. That's what they're telling us. I've seen this on national TV. We get these physicists out there say, oh, nothing can create something. It's happening all the time. For example, Dr. Paul Davies, a physicist, writes, space-time could appear out of nothingness as a result of a quantum transition. Particles can appear out of nothing without specific causation. Yet the world of quantum mechanics routinely produces something out of nothing. Well, what are we to say about that? Well, theories that the universe is a quantum fluctuation producing something out of nothing presupposes there was something there to fluctuate. See, they don't talk about that. However, you see, their quantum vacuum is a lot of matter, antimatter potential, not nothing. If the universe had no cause, then it can't have any properties to explain its extraordinary ability to call itself into existence by itself. Because it wouldn't have any properties until it actually came into existence. Therefore, option 1 and 2, option 1 being the universe created itself, and option 2, the universe has always existed, cannot be true unless we simply do not want to believe in science and logic. The universe simply could not call itself into existence, and the universe could not have existed for infinity. But what about God? What about God here? Well, see, the Bible teaches God is the creator of all things. He is the creator of space, time, and matter. We see that in the very first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Therefore, he is not bound by the laws of science that govern material things. And he does not need a first cause. He has always existed, and he's not material. Therefore, that does not violate any known laws of science, that God is the creator of all things. So as we bring this to a conclusion, C.S. Evans, PhD in philosophy, makes this statement. Belief in God is genuinely coherent with all we know about ourselves and our universe. It contradicts no known facts, and it makes sense of many things that would otherwise be inexplicable. Now, let's turn to the Bible. Colossians 1:16 and 17 teach us this. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things exist. He is indeed the creator of all things. He created space, time, and matter, and he transcends this creation. He is not bound by it. And then let's turn to a scene in heaven. The book of Revelation, chapter 4, verses 9 through 11. And we read, whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who sits on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him, who lives forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, you are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. See, all of creation, including the hosts of heaven, cry out for a creator God, whom we will all be held accountable to. Thank you, and God bless you. If these lessons have been a blessing to you, you might consider financially supporting the Ministry of Creation Training Initiative. You can do this by going to our website, creationtraining.org. Again, that's creationtraining.org. Your tax-deductible donation of just $20, $50 or more a month, or a one-time gift of any amount will make you an education partner in building an army of Christian educators who can teach the biblical account of creation and train others to be able to defend their faith and be biblically faithful to God's word, as it states in 1 Peter 3:15. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you, with meekness and
How do I get back to the original PowerPoint? This? Should be the same one. Sorry, sir.
The more you need to focus on what you're doing,
All right, I'm going to be stopping the broadcast temporarily. We'll resume in about.
Today is not March the 1st. It's March the 1st,